Um, yeah, I'll tell you, you at the end of my presentation, you'll figure out how I got, why I was so inspired by this, what inspired this title. So I am a newly minted PhD graduate from University of Waterloo. I defended in April. Yeah. After 10 years. I was a part-time student, and I also have a day job. I'm an associate dean at Sheridan College. Um, I want you to read this. If you are aware of Adichie, she had one of the most watched TED Talk on YouTube. I think more than 13 million people watched the Danger of a Single Story. So this quote from her is really powerful. I'll let you read it. It's about power, right? Power and who tells the story. And it's not only who tells the story, how is the story being told? So she says, the Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti writes that if you want to dispossess a people, the simplest way to do is to tell their story and to start with, secondly, right? She says, start the story with the errors of the Native Americans and not with the arrival of the British, and you have an entirely different story. Start the story with the failure of the African state, not with the colonial creation of the African state, and you have an entirely different story. So we have been, if you've been here yesterday and today, and you just heard Jeff Lawrence keynote, what we do is about story. It's all about story. What stories do we tell in the class, in our classroom? What stories as teachers, do we tell our students and our students tell us? So human beings thrive on stories. That's how we learn. That's how we communicate and we engage. These are some of the stories being told in the Canadian media. I'm going to turn this off, right? We have recently been demonizing foreign students and blaming them for the troubles of Canada. No housing, blame the international students. Food prices are increasing, blame the international students, right? Go back to China. That was very prevalent during the pandemic because I am half Chinese, and believe me, people have told me, go back to China. I'm like, I live in Canada, I'm Canadian, and so this is the kind of stories. And then again, we are very, if you, like me, move through the world as a person of color, you are very familiar with being asked, where are you from? And if you say, I'm from Oakville, Canada, no, where are you really from? Right? So the where are you from sounds like a very innocent question, but to people like me, it means I belong, but you don't. So where are you from? Okay, so these are some of the stories being told. So Asia Martinez wrote a book, Counter Story. And a lot of my dissertation is based on counter story, and my whole thesis is a counter story. I tell my story growing up in a post-British previous British colony, and the fact that I had to go through a British system of education. I tell my story. So she says counter story's aim is for social justice. It is to eliminate racism, sexism, poverty, and to empower the subordinated minority groups. Now, I just want to just let you know, not every marginalized story is a counter story. There is a litmus test. And the litmus test is, do the storytellers and stories subscribe to the tenets of critical race theory? And I'm sure you're familiar with critical race theory. It came from the legal studies in the US, and a very huge proponent is Kimberly Crenshaw. Kimberly Crenshaw talked about critical race theory and I'll talk about it more as a verb rather than a noun. And so not every story of a marginalized person is a counter story. And one of the main, the litmus test, as I said, is does the counter story has to critique the dominant ideology of whiteness, color blindness, and it also has to have a sustained objective of social justice as an objective, okay? It is rooted, as I said, in the narrative method of CRT. It challenges dominant narratives by centering marginalized voices. It helps our students see power, identity, and language in new ways. And as I said, CRT is more a verb than a noun. It's not an isn't. We have to do work. We have to labor every single day. Um, and let me just go, yeah. And why do we need CRT in language education? And when I saw the call for this conference, and I thought, more than ever now, we need to have counter stories, given what is happening in the world today, right? Because Counter story will promote critical consciousness, validates students' lived experiences, encourages multilingualism and cultural hybridity, as opposed to monolingualism and standard language ideology. It challenges deficit narratives about language learners, right? So some of the deficit narratives about language learners, and I think about minority people are, the model minority myth that all Chinese students are good at math. I got that. I'm really bad at math. All Chinese students, all Asian students are very hardworking. We have all these myths that are ascribed to us, and then another myth again is that I mentioned just now is that everything that is happening in Canada, we blame the international students. And we blame the bad actors for bringing all these students, and that's why we are in this mess, right? Paulo Freire, who wrote The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, he said, teaching is never neutral. It serves as a political act that either empowers or reinforces oppression. Okay? So what are the pedagogical benefits of having counter story in your language education class? It encourages empathy and perspective taking. And just now, we've been talking a lot about the use of AI and I think Jeff was talking about agency, affect, and community. We want to encourage empathy in the language classroom, right? It builds inclusive classroom, it strengthens narrative and rhetorical skills. Why does it strengthen rhetorical skills? How? Because when you allow your students to tell their stories in the language classroom, you allow them to deconstruct the stock stories that are being told in the academy, okay? So you help them to deconstruct that. It fosters student agency and voice, and we've talked a lot about agency or in this conference, right? How do you use counter stories? So I'm going to show you a bit. So you can invite your students to share personal stories of language and identity, analyze literature and media through counter story lens, right? For many of you, you're familiar with Jane Eyre. And you're familiar that Mr. Rochester had a first wife, Bertha, and she was tucked away. She was mad. She was tucked away in some part of his home, in his palace or whatever. And she was a person of color. And so Dominican British author John Rees, he wrote Wide Sargasso Sea in 1966 as a postmodern novel, and it was a prequel to Jane Eyre. And he told it from the perspective of Bertha, the mad wife, right? So these are some of the ways that we can allow our students to tell their own stories to counter the dominant stories, right? Again, writing prompts to reimagine dominant cultural texts. Again, create digital storytelling projects. And at Sheridan, we have a Stories of Home project that was created by our ESL faculty. I won't go into it, but if you're interested, I'll give you the website later on. This was something that I came across in Stanford University. They have a module called Counter Story in Literature and Education. So you can see that the students will actually look at questions of point of view, multivocality, and especially the ethics of representation. There is a course on this in Stanford. Now, some of the classroom strategies that you can use: journaling, reflective writing, collaborative storytelling, comparing dominant and versus counter narratives, and role-playing and dramatization. Example, let's rewrite the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Let's tell it from the perspective of the wolf, or even from the grandmother. So what are the challenges and considerations of doing counter story? There is a risk of tokenization and stereotyping. You have to navigate sensitive topics. Who knows what parsnip is? Politics, alcohol. I'm trying to remember. Yes, race, sex. I'm trying to remember. I have it here somewhere. Isms, and I think pork, the last one, right? And then balancing curriculum requirements and critical pedagogy. But I think the most important consideration is teacher readiness. Are our teachers in the classroom trained and ready in order to facilitate counter stories? That's a big question we need to ask. Now, conclusion is it's a powerful tool in language education. It helps disrupt dominant narratives. It builds critical, inclusive, empowering classrooms and allows students to see themselves as authors of change, agency. This was the poem that actually inspired my title. Sometimes the wolf cries girl. Sometimes the hero stumbles and falls off the page. Sometimes the princess rolls her eyes and says, I don't want to be saved. Sometimes the dragon needs rescuing and the villain aches to be helped. Sometimes in the darkness, the lost boy finds himself. And sometimes the prince is cunning and not all what he seemed. Sometimes the witch's kindness shows it is she who deserves to be queen. Sometimes we shouldn't define people by someone else's point of view. Just because it's what we've been told doesn't make it true. The personal is political. When you tell your story, you disrupt the systems that depend on your silence. Thank you. And I don't have time to show my video, so I'm not going to show my video.
You could finish 1 minute earlier, by the way.
I could?
Yeah,
You
finished 1 minute earlier.
Oh, but we don't have time now, so it's okay. That's a video. No, thank.
No time?
Can we show the video? Yeah, can I? Do you guys have questions? We must watch the video. Okay, so this video is recent. It just came from an Instagram and it's very powerful. It is something that I feel is powerful. And this is, she tells her own story, right? And I hope it shows and I hope you can see. No, why is there no sound?
Oh, you just turn up the volume.
Without presenting any warrants at one.
Okay, how do I start again?
Just refresh the page, refresh the page.
Where do I read? Sorry.
Or just F5.
F?
F5.
Yes.
Sorry, and this is not my computer. Nope.
You can refresh here
Oh, I couldn't see. Okay, sorry.
or
What is it?
you have to open the.
Morning in Chicago, Illinois, the federal government deployed Black Hawk helicopters to raid a residential apartment. ICE agents broke into the homes of U.S. citizens without presenting any warrants at 1 in the morning while people were asleep in their beds. U.S. citizens were zip-tied, dragged out of their beds, and forced to wait for several hours in the cold. These citizens committed no crimes. The only justification offered to these U.S. citizens for the warrantless entries into their homes, for the hours-long detentions in the middle of the night, was that ICE agents needed to check first whether they were U.S. citizens. These are, of course, the same ICE agents who have admitted that they detain people based in part on their appearance and their proficiency in non-English languages. And now I'm going to tell you a story about me, my father, and an ugly-ass typewriter. I was 9 years old when my father dragged this ugly freaking monstrosity of a typewriter into my room and told me I needed to spend the afternoon writing a letter. It was a grievance letter to his union representative outlining how he was being mistreated by his supervisor. Why was I a 9-year-old being asked to type up my father's letter? Because he knew that even at 9 years old, I would be proofreading his writing. I would be fixing his writing. I would be making sure that his writing was American enough. I hated that typewriter. I hated my dad's supervisor, and I hated that he was making me do this. But you know what? Today, I'm glad, because that stupid typewriter, it trained me to recognize the vague contours of injustice, to translate my father's inarticulable rage into the undeniable print of black and white, to defend his sacrifice and his right to be, with my very perfect English words that I needed to learn to write those stupid letters. I know that many of you watching this right now probably had your own stupid typewriter in your own bedroom. That at 9 years old, you too were being asked to translate bank statements, invoices, weird-looking letters from the government, that you too had to hop onto customer service phone calls, watch your parents get humiliated, debased, infantilized, dehumanized because they had the wrong freaking accent. I know you had to suffer through the slings of microaggression when you were too little, too young, too unarmed to do anything about it. Well, you're not too young. You're not too little anymore. And you are most certainly not unarmed. Use those English words. Use them now. Use them frequently. Use them loudly. Use them to defend the ones who sacrificed everything so that you guys could have a freaking typewriter to begin with.
Powerful.
Wow.
Yeah. Can I stop the share? Yeah, so that was very powerful. So I came across that, and that is a powerful counter story, right? And I follow her now, and that I think had me in tears when I first heard it, because for many of us, we have similar stories. right? Helping your parents. So thank you for listening.